Welcome to the Better Together podcast, where we look for ways we can work together to advance the gospel of Jesus Christ. Today, I have with us three Arkansas pastors. We've got Blaine Hughes in Russellville, Arkansas at the Connect Church. You can see in his background, Connect Church, and it looks like a lot of coffee. So that gives you a little sense of who Mr. Blaine is. We also have Kevin Barnett. You'll see in his background, he's got some agriculture equipment. So his background actually was in agribusiness, but now he's the pastor there at Sutton Baptist Church in Pocahontas, Arkansas. And then there's Ben. He's got those two fish on his background there. He caught one of those when he was a young man in Colorado, but he's doing good works at Phillips. Is it Phillips Chapel or Phillips Church?
Phillips Chapel
in Greeley, Arkansas. And so it's great to have you three with us today. Now, our listeners may be saying, what is so great about Arkansas? But there's a lot of good things about Arkansas. We're not going to go through all that right now. But the reason I wanted to talk to you all today was because I went to your state meeting and everything was about discipleship. You three spoke, and there was another speaker as well who talked about discipleship. And so I just had to ask you, why is it that you focus so much on discipleship there in Arkansas? What is it that led you all to focus on that initiative?
Yeah, when we were putting together the state meeting, one of the things that we talked about was what was the needs of the church. Because when we think about state meetings, sometimes it becomes all about business. But yet we wanted to train our ministers or give them something that they could go home with that would be helpful and beneficial in their local churches. And so as we started talking about it, we actually put together a 3-year plan where we would discuss discipleship for the next 3 years, starting in 2024, which we've done this last May. And so we began with preparing for discipleship, getting ourselves in the right place and leadership of the church in the right place. And then 2025, we're actually looking at practical discipleship. And then 2026 is producing discipleship. So that's kind of our target areas that we wanted to go with. But we felt there was a need to kind of get back to what we see Jesus do in the Bible with the 12 and even that inner circle that he had. So that was the premise for what we started with as we started planning state meeting.
So you were thinking, okay, we've got some continuity. First of all, the state meeting is focused on a theme, which often they do, but it's also talking about how to put something into practice immediately that's going to help the church. And we're not just talking about one state meeting. We're talking about a series of years where we focus on this. I know a lot of people are listening and they think, well, discipleship is great, but really we've got to focus on evangelism and outreach. And so I'm wondering, what led you all to focus on discipleship rather than some other subjects?
Well, for me, primarily, with Jesus's last real command to his disciples before his ascension was to make disciples. In my experience as a pastor for almost 30 years, everything flows out of discipleship. Like if you can get people to catch the idea of discipleship, you'll get evangelism and you'll get fellowship and you'll get Bible studies if we can model Christ, because his life modeled all those things. And so a lot of times we focus on one or the other. But in my opinion, and so far, fruit has been that it's almost like a funnel. If you can get people into the discipleship funnel, then you'll get everything else. And I might just say too, evangelism is great, all for evangelism, but discipleship makes evangelists. Even, and this might be a little bit too much, but even marriage and family ministry and all of those things, they are essential to our culture, but they flow out of discipleship. And just a step further, disciple making. The goal isn't discipleship. When we think, and for me, for many years, decades, maybe even, discipleship is about Bible study. Disciple making is about replication and multiplication. When Paul talks about the ultimate goal for Timothy, 2 Timothy 2:2 is to build Christ's life into other men who can then know how to replicate or multiply. So again, evangelism is great. Making converts excellent. It should be a part of every disciple's path. But that's addition if one person is trying to do that all around the world. But if we can replicate Christ's life in the people that are saying yes to Christ's life, then we kind of get all of it.
And it seems like I remember you preaching or speaking about come and see, so that was one of the things we see in the Gospels. And then Jesus constantly saying, follow me. And that's what you're really saying is discipleship can't take place without evangelism. They're really one and the same.
Exactly. I don't want to speak too much, but I'm working on right now just a model of Jesus's process. I know a lot of men have done that, but I'm just to get it in my own processes. But there are at least 4 primary invitations that Jesus gives individuals, and I won't work all the way through that. But there are 4 stages of development, and Jesus didn't expect from one stage, if a person's not in that stage yet. And so, to me, it's if there's a come and see stage where Jesus, that stage has certain expectations. But if we expect say a stage 4 from a stage 1 person, everybody's going to be in limbo or frustrated, or they walk away. So if we can learn how to develop as pastors to equip the saints to do the work of the ministry, if we can help identify what stage of development they're in, then we can expose them to the right things that can help them continue to grow and to process and win and become full, well-rounded disciples. So yeah, I'm still working on a lot of that, but man, the more I dig in, the more I see it.
But you all provided a lot of that at the stake meeting. You provided the foundation for it that we find, especially in the Gospels. And Ben, you as well provided that. And also, listeners may think, but did people figure out, or did they learn a bit about how to do this? And you all talked a lot about nuts and bolts as well, didn't you?
We did. And it's, my dad used to say there's more than one way to skin a cat. So it works differently in different environments, but we just knew we had to start somewhere, and we did. So we focused on a couple of things. We did some best practice analysis with some churches in our area that were making disciples through small groups. And a guy named Jim Shaw at First Baptist in Rogers helped me out with that. They try to do more of less. Their focus is on small groups. And so we kind of moved in that direction. And that's evolved and grown over the last 11 years that we've been doing that, to where we've got a participative learning environments that are multi-generational. So families are gathering together with other families, and they're participating in the life of Christ. I don't have a formula or a scope and sequence. It's appallingly simple. We try to get people together in that participative learning environment where they can ask questions and express doubts, and we're learning and growing together. And there's something so valuable in that when somebody who's been a Christian for 50 years can put their arm around somebody who's a new believer or a young mother or a young father and help them walk through that particular stage of life. And then we don't try to, as we focus on participative learning environments, we're not trying to minimize corporate worship at all. Here's where I kind of borrowed something from John Piper. He talks about the difference between the Mount of Transfiguration and the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount's a large crowd. Jesus is teaching, and that's our corporate worship. There's value in that. Teaching in a way to make disciples. You're inviting people out of the crowd and to come and follow Jesus. And then the Sermon on the Mount's a small group. They're participating in what's going on. Highly transformative for those that are involved. And so we kind of went that direction. And outside of that, we use the Swedish method almost exclusively, where everybody's reading the same text throughout the week. We gather together and we work through 5 different questions according to what everybody's read in the text. And so there's a pooling of wisdom, and the Spirit bears witness, and that's what's worked for us. So that's my nuts and bolts.
It's nuts and bolts. And also, you, if I recall, you gave a example that you experienced when you were in North Carolina,
Yes, sir.
where it ties to evangelism and discipleship. You
Yes.
had an international student that knew nothing about the Bible, right? And that kind of got you on this trail. Is my memory correct on that?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And John Sinkhorn, my youth pastor at the time, deserves more credit than I do on that. And I told the story because of how transformative it was for me, and how I was inviting people to become a disciple of Jesus. I had totally different expectations for him than I did for the people in my church. Very low expectations for the people in my church, and just add Jesus to your life, believe, confess, and we move on. But this particular international student was Muslim, and so we're talking about a long, multi-week, month-long process where we were expecting him to take up his cross and die to himself in order to follow Jesus. And I realized then that there's no difference, as Blaine said, no difference between evangelism and discipleship. Evangelism and discipleship are the same thing. It's just different sections in the sequence, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so you all been doing this individually in your past. You've been doing it at your church, and you've done it in different ways. Kevin, you had a layperson in your church. I think his name is Justin, and he actually gave a presentation and talked about what it was like. Maybe walk our listeners through how that all went initially as you all started really going down this road there at Pocahontas.
Yeah, so we when we were planning state meeting, one of the things that we thought would be important would be to get not just ministers speaking about this, but some of the lay people from within our church, people that it has actually affected, and then they've went on to affect someone else's life with that or their home life with it. So we had an individual, Justin Stewart was his name, that came and he presented about the discipleship group that he was in, the change that it had led in his life, and how he was now beginning to lead one. And it changed much about his home life, maybe before it changed anything outside of that. But he and his wife have both been through a D group individually now. They've actually both been to Jamaica, I think 3 times on mission trips, which is another extension of what we've tried to do to get people outside of just their home church and think abroad about the body of Christ, not just the local church or their own life. And they actually went this past summer when the hurricane came through Jamaica. They were actually down there and got to live through that time. But they have a heart now, especially Justin has a heart now for helping people. And it's different than what it was before. And he has a pretty dramatic testimony from his life growing up. But he gives a lot of credit to people that were willing to hold him accountable, which is what a lot of what we do in D group here is just an accountability. And we've kind of asked questions every year after we finish those D groups. What's the most valuable thing that you learned out of this last year? And in the top 3, it always comes back that accountability is really important. And so sometimes accountability was something people did not want. But if we do it in the right way, it seems that they actually appreciate it, because those that want to grow deeper in Christ sometimes need someone to encourage them along, which is this disciple making that I think Blaine was talking about a moment ago, and being as well, just someone that will walk with us through that, but also hold us accountable to going beyond where we are in life. And so that's kind of what Justin talked about. It seems, and I've had him do it on 2 different occasions in front of 2 different groups, and it seems that that's much more impactful than me standing up there and talking about things. When people in church hear other people from within church, it seems to make a difference in their life.
I also think it's impactful, whether you're a lay person listening or a pastor's listening, to hear you guys, you've done this, you've been doing this for years. And so I can kind of learn from you things that worked well for you, things that didn't, and I don't have to reinvent the wheel. And so I'm wondering a little bit, it sounds great. I think Justin was part of your second group. So the first group, Kevin, was probably a bit of a struggle. I believe I've heard you say, but all of you can probably give us some pitfalls to avoid, or some things to be on the lookout. What are some of the things? I'm trying to get started in this either as a lay person or a pastor. What are some things to be careful of, or we can learn from your experiences?
Well, if I might just quickly, I've been to a lot of discipleship conferences, and guys will stand up, these keynote speakers will stand up, say, everybody can remember those people in your life that discipled you. And, when, even those times that my wife is with me, we think about, nobody was intentional with us growing up. I mean, we had people in our life, but we were never discipled like intentionally through those things. I mean, we were, again, thank God for those who brought us up, but we just kind of make firm commitments that we're going to learn how to disciple people, and for the next generation for sure. And so this may not be the answer to your question, but what I decided to do was to learn Jesus's process, or try to at least. And then I just found the people that were already in my life, people that I thought would already say yes. And I didn't try to program it through the church. I didn't try to get the whole church on board. I'm not trying to get approval. I'm just trying to, Jesus never sought that. And so I thought, if I could just go ahead and build from relationships rather than programs, there's already people in our lives. Let's just go ahead and just take those relationships. So I started developing those relationships. And over a period of time, I started sending those out into their relationships. And so now we're already multiplying. And I can just kind of, when I say keep tabs, I don't mean micromanage, but I can kind of, from time to time, reach back to those first generation guys in my life and encourage them and take them to the next step. Then they can take their guys to the next step. And so over time, I will move from one group, and while I'm cultivating new relationships, then I'll create a discipleship group out of those new relationships, and I'll build those guys up for a year, 18 months. And then I will identify a leader in that group, and I will empower them to be their own group. And then I'll go start another group. And over time, now there are groups, there's discipleship groups all over our city, many people in them that don't even go to our church. And that to me, this is not a church growth plan, because there's probably as many people that have been frustrated and walked away from those groups as there have been fruit come from them. But there's a lot more groups now than there were before we did them. And so there is a lot of, I don't want to call it failure, but it is identification of figuring out who is God giving me right now? Who is God empowering me to speak into, and then just go with it. And if there's, if there's lack of success, or if there's lack of fruit, then so be it. But there's going to be fruit, because it flows from faithfulness and obedience, and God will always bless that. Everybody's not ready for that, but there are people in our lives right now that are ready for that. And I will tell you now, starting from then till now, I know a whole lot more about people and disciple making than I knew when I got started. There's been some failure in my life where I've learned I ain't doing that no more, or I'm not going to go after just the popular people or the influential people. I'm going to go after people who are hungry for Jesus. And there's a big difference sometimes between those two groups. And so anyway, that's probably too much, but for me, I can think and really weep over the people who didn't make it through. And it's really sad, but man, there are so many people I didn't think would make it through that are leading groups right now. So,
it's great when you get to the point where people are actually asking to be in one. They've heard about it from other people, and they want that type of mentorship or relationship within their life. So it's great when you have people asking to be in that. And while it hurts that you don't have somewhere to stick them, maybe at that moment in time, you quickly try and find that type of a structure to stick them in order for that growth to happen. But I think I shared with you, Brother Eddie, about the way ours got started. And when I came to the church, our youngest deacon at that time was 75. And they told me, they said, we lose a lot of students out of high school. Some go to college, move away, but we have a youth program that's been pretty good over the years, but we don't seem to hang on our students, and we want to fix that. And so we started thinking about how to do that. And I actually went to the D6 conference that year, and Robbie Gallaty was one of the speakers, which I'd heard before, but through his books, we kind of developed a plan that worked for the church. Now, the first year, if we start measuring off the first year, I would have said it would have been a failure. But looking backward, it wasn't. We started with 4 guys plus myself, and one of those guys dropped out in the first month and a half because he thought it was going to be a Thursday night visitation program. And so tried to work through that with him. And he said, well, why can't we just talk about the stuff in the car on the way to knocking on somebody else's house? I said, well, that's not what this is about, but it is about training you to be able to do that if that's what you feel like God's leading you to do. He never could resonate that in his mind. So he ended up dropping out. Had another guy that his workload changed and he had to kind of pull out as well. So we ended up finishing with 2. One of those guys, actually became a deacon that is now in his late 40s, and he was our first in a younger generation of deacons to kind of come through the church. And I look back, that was a very valuable group, even though number-wise, it didn't show that it was. It ended up being a very valuable group. So it's hard to kind of sit and measure. I say this because of what Blaine just talked about. It's hard to sit and measure sometimes the fruit that comes out of it. And the ways we sometimes look at measuring is not the most accurate ways of measuring it. There will be fruit that comes. And even out of those 2 guys that dropped out, they have a different perspective than they did, even though it was a short period of time that they were there. So
yeah, I have a little rubric that I run guys through. It helps them identify like what stage of development they're actually in. Like, this is the fruit that this stage should be developing right now. And this guy, he was so eager to be in a group. He doesn't attend our church, but he was so eager, and it's a super early morning. And after the first meeting, they all kind of identified where they thought they were. He called me late that night, and he said, Pastor Blaine, is there any way I could meet with you in the morning at your house? He had to go to work early, so it was like 6 a.m. in the morning. And I thought, I don't really know this guy that well. But he come in and we sat down for a minute, and with tears, he said, I don't even honestly know if I'm a Christian. My church has told me that I am one, but I don't know any of this. I don't really do any of this. I'm not sure that I've not even really committed my life to Jesus. And again, I'm not saying that churches should evaluate each other. I'm just saying that this guy was pretty content just going to a building. But talking about disciple making, I mean, he recognized in his life, I'm not a follower of Jesus at all. And so he gave his life to the Lord, and he's still not in our church. He still goes to the other church, and thank the Lord, because now, not only is that family experiencing different things, but that church has a godly man in it that he's leading Bible studies and stuff like that, disciple groups. And so it's pretty exciting to see what God does. I'm not trying. Disciple making is not about talking people out of their faith, but it is about helping them to understand where they are, because they can't produce what they've not experienced, right? I mean, they can't produce. Anybody can just go to church, or anybody can just sit in a group. But to follow Jesus takes a lot of intentionality that our people, I think, sometimes aren't being equipped to examine or live out in their daily life.
And so that's the key you guys talk about. And I think you even said something, Ben, it's part of the ordinary. I mean, it's done through ordinary parts of life. In other words, people doing life together. We'll give you the last word, buddy. Okay. What feedback do you have for lay people, pastors, trying to start off in this process?
Well, I would say you got to start where you are, and you don't know what you don't know. So, when we started out, we tried to focus on putting people where they were comfortable. And again, to borrow something from John Piper, he said that small groups can be a great place to pet sin if there's no clear vision and no accountability. And so we had a massive turnover twice in the life of our small group ministry. Have some of the same leadership, but people were commiserating instead of edifying one another. And in some cases that just became toxic, and we had, wholesale, and I would call that a failure on my part, because I didn't know what I didn't know. And we do things totally different now. And I love Blaine's word intentionality, and we take more of a hands-on approach rather than a passive approach. The passive approach would be just to expect people to come, and discipleship's going to happen naturally. They're going to hear enough of the word, listen to enough Sunday school lessons, listen to enough sermons, that sooner or later they're going to get it. And they may, but most likely they're not. And more hands-on is just really inviting people to live life. I want you to come and live the Christian life with me. We're going to follow Jesus together. And when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm going to own it. I'm going to humble myself. We're going to learn together. And by the way, I think people are clamoring for that kind of honesty and transparency in the church. Young people, especially. The largest growing group in our church right now is 20 somethings. Mm-hmm. And I know we can talk about metrics all day long, but it gives me a lot of hope for the church that there's another generation coming along who want to follow Jesus, and they're desperately searching for somebody to show them how. Our system's not perfect by any means, but man, I'm having a lot of fun in ministry right now. Mm-hmm. I really am.
I remember one of the things you all said was it's very messy. And so our listeners, I'm sure, have picked that up. It wasn't easy, and it's still not easy, but it's working. It's truly working. And I just applaud you. I applaud the state of Arkansas, first of all, for making it an initiative and working so hard to help all of your churches do that. And I applaud you guys being really pioneers to, show the way and get in there and get in the trenches to do what you can to help make disciples and really make a difference. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and thank you for what you're doing in your local churches and in your community. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you
for allowing me to be a part of the conversation. I'm grateful.
Yeah. So I know all of you all are very helpful and would be willing to help people that are trying to get started. So I'm just going to say to our listeners, if you're interested in making contact with them, just email us at questions@nafwb.org. We can share their contact information and you can reach out to them. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. So check that out. We've got another podcast out there with Kevin talking about kind of the nuts and bolts and more detail about that initial start where they did D groups, which I think everybody needs to hear to know, as this group has shared, it's not an easy thing. And there were some rocky parts along the way. And so we need to know that's what's going to happen as we do something new or do something that really matters in ministry. So we encourage you, email us if you want to get in touch with these guys, and we'll do what we can to make that happen. Thank you guys for joining us today. We appreciate it greatly.
Thank you.
Can I finish with one thing, Brother Eddie?
Yes, Brother Kevin.
Just had a text come through while we were on this, actually, from older lady that's a widow in the church. She was in a D group when her husband passed away, and she said that D group actually helped her get through that moment in life. But we always encourage people to find a place within the church to serve or to work after they've went through this. She come to me and she said, I realize we don't have any kind of ministry for widows. And she said, would you mind if I started that? I said, you know, go at it. And so she just texted me and she said, I've got a new widow that's going to be joining the group today. Do you have a book that we can give to her? So it's just kind of, sometimes things happen that you don't even see coming. And that was one of them, but it's been a very beneficial thing within the church. And I know those things happen all over the place. It's not just here, but it takes the time and the effort. Being said it well, it's not easy, but it's well worth it.
Absolutely. And she sends that while we're doing this podcast. So that's pretty cool, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, we want to thank you, our listeners, for joining us today. We want to encourage you to take this podcast, share it with somebody that would benefit. And remember, every little thing we do, it really does matter. We truly are better when we work together. Thank you for being with us. God bless you.